Hey guys, uh, I'm ready to keep reading, but this is the third time in a day, so doing some of the voices is kind of hard on my throat a little bit, so I might have to take it down a notch so I don't lose my voice so I can keep reading. But I'll give it a try. I'm really enjoying reading this book again. I haven't read this book since the first time I read it. I was probably 10 or 11. Let me see, when did this book come out? This book was published in, oh my gosh, 1986. So it had been out for a while before I got my hands on it. I had no idea that they were that old, but they were written by a British guy. So maybe they didn't catch on in the States as quick as they did over in the motherland. So I don't know. Either way, there were a lot of these books coming out like in pretty quick order. I remember being in middle school, so like 6th through 8th grade, I guess, when they were just like bam, 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 coming out in pretty quick order. And it got to the point where when a new one was coming out, the kids at school would get really excited about it, and it was like, oh, when you're done with it, let me borrow it, or reserve your copy at the library so you could get your hands on it, because they were really popular for a while. I'm guessing that they still are pretty popular because there were a lot of them at the bookstore. I was looking for a used copy. I had to buy a new one of this particular book. This is Brian Jacques wrote a lot of these books. They're not in. They aren't released in like a sequential chronological order. Each book is kind of its own story, kind of in the whole mythology, and it jumps around between one and another. And usually characters aren't in more than one book. I think there might be one where it's like, I think there's one called Madameo, and I think he's like maybe Matthias's son or something. But there's one about Martin the Warrior, and then there's one about just different things in different timelines, or not same timeline, but just different events in the timeline. It looks like from here there's 22 in all from the cover. So, guy was a prodigious writer. I think he even like was gonna come to our school, or did, and I didn't hear about it or missed it. But something happened, and I know the author came to Alaska at one point because some of the kids I went to school with, we're gonna go try to see him and get their books autographed and listen to him read a couple of chapters of one of his new books. And I didn't really know what that meant or was going on at the time, and I didn't take advantage of it. Maybe your Aunt Jenny, she might have heard of it because she was going to the same school I was. But I don't know. It's just kind of whatever. That's what was going on, and it was cool, and I hope you're enjoying it. So the last thing we read was chapter 8. Is it? Oh no, we read chapter 7 was last. Now we're on chapter 8. I gotta go back and fix the description of the last video. So Clooney has made it to the Redwall area and is staying at St. Ninian's Church. And Matthias and Constance saw him while they were out taking some of the other mice home after the festivities, the feast. Okay, back to Clooney. Clooney the Scourge was having nightmares. He had lain down in the church mouse's bed for a well-earned rest while his army was going about its allotted tasks. He should never have tried to sleep on an empty stomach, but weariness overcame his hunger. In Clooney's dream, everything was shrouded in a red mist. The cries of his victims rang out as barns blazed and ships foundered on a stormy Red Sea. Cattle bellowed in pain as he, goodness, cattle bellowed in pain as he battled with the pike that had taken his eye. The warlord thrashed about, killing, conquering, and laying waste to all in his dream. Then the phantom figure appeared. I'm guessing that is the phantom figure. What could that mean? You think it could be this guy? Do you think it could be Matthias? Matthias? I don't know. Doesn't look much like him, but he is wearing a robe. At first it seemed a small thing. A mouse, in fact, dressed in a long hooded robe. Clooney did not relish meeting with it. He could not tell why, but the mouse kept getting closer to him. For the first time in his life, he turned and ran. Clooney went like a bat out of hell. Glancing back, he saw all the carnage, death, and misery he had caused in his career. The big rat laughed insanely and ran faster, on and on, past scenes of desolation and destruction wreaked by him. Clooney, the scourge. Floating through the red mists, he could still see the strange mouse hard on his heels. Clooney felt himself filled with hatred for his pursuer. It seemed to have grown larger. Its eyes were cold and grim. Deep inside, Clooney knew that not even he could frighten this oddly garbed mouse. Now it was wielding a large, bright sword, like an ancient weapon of terrible beauty. The battle-scarred blade had a word written upon it that he could not make out. Sweat dripped from Clooney's claws like stinging acid. He stumbled. The strange figure was closer. It had grown into a giant. Clooney's lungs felt as if they were bursting. He realized that he had slowed up and the mouse was getting closer. He tried to put on an extra burst of speed, but his legs would not obey. They ran more and more slowly, more and more heavily. Clooney cursed aloud his leaden limbs. He saw he was trapped in deep, icy mud. For the first time, he knew the meaning of mindless fear and panic. He turned slowly. Too late. The enemy was upon him. He was rooted, helpless to the spot. The avenging mouse swung his sword up high. A million lights flashed from its deadly blade as it struck. Bong! The loud toll of the distant Joseph bell brought Clooney whirling back from the realms of nightmares to cold reality. He shivered, wiping the sweat from his fur with a shaky claw. Saved by the bell. He was puzzled. What did the fearful dream mean? Clooney had never been one to put faith in omens, but this dream, it had been so lifelike and vivid that he shuddered. A timid paw was tapping on the door. Snapped Clooney from his reverie with a start. It was Rag-Ear and Mange-Fur, his scavengers. They slunk into the room, each trying to hide behind the other, knowing that the poor results of their search were likely to incur the chief's wrath. Their assumption was correct. Clooney's baleful eye watched them as his long, flexible tail sorted through the paltry offerings which had dropped from their claws. A few dead beetles, 2 large earthworms, some unidentifiable vegetation, and the pitiful carcass of a long-dead sparrow. Clooney smiled at Rag-Ear and Mange-Fur. With a sigh of relief, they grinned back at him. The chief was in a good mood. At lightning speed, the big rat's claws shot out and grabbed them both cruelly by their ears. The stupid hench rats yowled piteously as they were lifted bodily from the floor and swung to and fro. In a fit of rage, Clooney bashed their heads together. Half senseless, they were hurled toward the doorway, with his angry words ringing in their skulls. Beetles! Worms! Rotten sparrows! Get me meat! Young, tender, red meat! Next time you bring me rubbish like this, I'll spit the pair of you and have you roasted in your own juice. Is that clear? Rangeford pointed an accusing claw at his companion. Please, Chief, it was Raggear's fault. If we'd gone across the fields instead of up the road. Don't believe that big fat liar, Chief. It was him who suggested going up the road, not me. Get out! The scavengers dashed off, bumping clumsily into each other with panic as they tried to get through the door together. Clooney slumped back on the bed and snorted impatiently. Frogblood and Scumnose were the next to report. They bore news that cheered Clooney up somewhat. They'd obtained over 100 new recruits, mainly rats, but a good scattering of ferrets and weasels and the odd stoat. There had been some who needed convincing. These had been pressed gang by a savage beating from Frogblood, coupled with the threat of horrible death. They were soon convinced that the wisest course was to enlist in Clooney's horde. Others were hungry nomads, only too willing to join up with the infamous Clooney. They were greedy for plunder and booty, and pleased to be on what they were sure would be the winning side. Lined up in the churchyard, the recruits were supplied with weaponry by Redtooth and Darkclaw. Impassively they stood in ranks, awaiting the warlord's inspection. Clooney nodded his approval. Scurvy rats, hungry ferrets, sly weasels, bad stoats. Exactly what he needed. Read him the articles, Redtooth, he snapped. Redtooth swaggered back and forth on the churchyard paving as he recited the formula from memory. Right, eyes front. You're in the service of Clooney the Scourge now, me buckos. Desert and you'll be killed. Retreat and you're under sentence of death. Disobey and you'll die. I'm Redtooth, Clooney's #1 rat. You will obey the word of your captains. They take orders from me. I take orders from Clooney. Remember that. Now if anyone, two, or a group, or even all of you together want to try to beat Clooney and lead this horde, now's your chance. Without warning, Clooney charged headlong into the new recruits, lashing out wildly with his scourging tail. He bowled them left, right, and center with his massive strength. Baring his teeth and slitting his eye, he whipped fiercely away until they fell back and scattered in disorder, hiding behind gravestones. Clooney threw back his head and roared with laughter. No guts, eh? Ha! It's just as well. I don't want dead ends on my claws. Before I find a proper battle for you to fight, and make no mistake, when the right time comes, I'll see you fight, aye, and die too. Now raise your weapons and let's see if you know who your master is. The motley collection of evil-looking implements was framed by the cloudless sky as wild cries rang out from the newly inducted recruits. Clooney! Clooney! Clooney the Scourge! Abbot Mortimer and Constance, the badger, meandered through the grounds together. Both creatures were deep in thought. They had spoken and voiced their thoughts. Had they spoken and voiced their thoughts, they would have mentioned the same subject, the safety of Redwall. Down long ages, the beautiful old abbey had stood for happiness, peace, and refuge to all. Diligent mice tended the neat little vegetable patches, which every season gave forth an abundance of fresh produce. Cabbages, sprouts, marrows, turnips, peas, carrots, tomatoes, lettuces, and onions, all in their turn. Flower beds, heady and fragrant with countless varieties of summer blooms, from rose to humble daisy, were planted by the mice and husbanded by the hard-working bee folk, who in their turn rewarded Redwall with plentiful supplies of honey and beeswax. The two friends wandered onwards past the pond. Early morning sunlight glinted off the water, throwing out ripples from the fish caught by the overnight lines which were baited and left to drift each evening by Brother Alf. Ahead of them lay the berry hedges, raspberries, blackberries, bilberries, and the strawberry patch, where every August sleepy baby creatures could be seen, their stomachs full after eating the pick of the crop. Gradually they made their way around the big old chestnut trees into the orchard. This was the abbot's favorite spot. Many a leisurely nap had he taken on sunny afternoons, with the aroma of ripening fruit hovering in his whiskers. Apples, pears, quince, plums, damsons, even a vine of wild grape on the warm red stone of a south-facing wall. Old Mother Nature's blessings lay upon a haven of warm friendliness. That sounds wonderful. Now, with the threat of Cluny upon Redwall, the two old friends assessed the beauteous bounty of their lifelong abode. Sweet bird song on the still air tinged Constance's heart with sorrow and regret that this peaceful existence would soon pass. Gruffly, she snuffled deep in her throat, blinking off a threatening teardrop. The abbot sensed his companion's distress. He patted the badger's rough coat with a gentle paw. There, there, old girl, don't fret. Many times in our history has tragedy been forestalled by miraculous happenings. Constance grunted in agreement, not wishing to disillusion her trusting old friend. Deep within her, she knew a dark shadow was casting itself over the abbey. Furthermore, it was happening in the present, not in bygone days of fabled deeds. Matthias seated himself to an early breakfast in Cavern Hole. Nut bread, apples, and a bowl of fresh goat's milk. Cornflower, along with the other woodland creatures granted sanctuary, was sleeping in makeshift quarters provided by the good mice of Redwall. Matthias felt that he had grown up overnight. Duty was a mantle that he had taken willingly upon his shoulders. If there were a threat to Redwall from outside, it must be dealt with. The mice of Redwall were peaceful creatures, but that must not be taken as a sign of weakness. Stolidly he munched away as he confronted the problem. Eat heartily, Matthias. No point in facing trouble on an empty stomach. Feed the body, nourish the mind. The young mouse was surprised to see that old brother Methuselah had been watching him, his eyes twinkling behind the curious spectacles he invariably wore. The ancient mouse sat down at the breakfast table with a small groan. Don't be so surprised, young one. Your face is an open book to one of my years. Matthias drained the last of his milk from his bowl, wiping cream from his whiskers with the back of his paw. Give me your advice, brother Methuselah, he said. What would you do? The old mouse wrinkled his nose. Exactly the same thing as you would, that is, if I were younger and not so old and stiff. Matthias felt he had found an ally. You mean you would fight? Methuselah rapped the table with a bony paw. Of course I would. It's the only sensible course to take. He paused and stared at Matthias in an odd manner. You know, there's something about you, young feller. Did you ever hear the story of how Martin the warrior first came to Redwall? Matthias leaned forward eagerly. Martin? Tell me, brother, I love hearing of the warrior monk. Methuselah's voice dropped to a secretive whisper. It is written in the great chronicle of Redwall that Martin was very young to be such a warrior. He could have been the same age as yourself, Matthias. Like you, he was impulsive. It had a great quality of youthful innocence about him when he first came to our abbey. But it is also written that in times of trouble, Martin had the gift of a natural leader, a command over others far superior to him in age and experience. The Chronicle says that they looked to Martin as some sort of a strong father. Matthias was full of wonderment, but he could not help feeling puzzled. Why do you tell me about all this, brother Methuselah? The old mouse stood up. He stared hard at Matthias for a moment, then turning, he shuffled slowly off. As he went, he called back over his shoulder, Because, Matthias, because he was very like you. Before the young mouse could question the old one further, the Joseph bell tolled without a warning. Sandals flapping, Matthias dashed out into the grounds, nearly colliding with the abbot and Constance, who, like everyone else, were heading for the gatehouse. Brothers Rufus and George had an incident to report. A large, evil-looking rat, covered in tattoos and carrying a rusty cutlass, had turned up at the gate. He had tried to gain entry by pretending he was injured. Limping about, the rat explained that he had been in a hay cart that overturned into the ditch. Would they come with him and render assistance to his friends, many of whom were lying trapped beneath the cart, crying out for help? Brother Rufus was no fool. How many rats were traveling in the cart altogether? He asked. Oh, couple hundred, came the glib reply. Why, then, reasoned Brother Rufus, did the rats not give aid to their own companions? Surely all 200 were not trapped. The rat evaded the question and made a great show of rubbing his injured leg. Could they not take him in and dress his wounds? Perhaps give him a bite to eat at least? Brother George agreed, on the condition that the rat surrender his weapon. The rat made as if to do so, then suddenly lunged at Brother George, only to be sent sprawling by a blow from Brother Rufus's staff. Realizing that he was up against two big, competent mice who would stand no nonsense, he became abusive and bad-mouthed. Ha! Just you wait, mice, he raged. There's a whole army of us camped down in the church. When I tell Clooney how you've treated me, ho ho, just wait, that's all. We'll be back, by the fang we will. And with that he slunk off, cursing all mice. The grim news was digested in silence by the assembled creatures. Mrs. Church Mouse began sobbing. Oh, dearie me, did you hear that, my dear? They must be living at our home at St. Ninian's Church. Oh, whatever shall we do? Our dear little home full of dreadful rats. Mr. John Church Mouse tried to comfort his wife as best he could. There, hush now, missus. Better to lose a house than our lives. A good job we got sanctuary here at Redwall. But what about the other creatures in the area? Cried Matthias. Sensible mouse, said Constance. Is Ambrose Spike anywhere about? He'd better do the rounds and tell them to take sanctuary here at the Abbey as quickly as possible. Spike will come to no harm. Once he curls up, there's nothing can touch him. This idea was greeted with enthusiasm. Brother Alf went off to find the hedgehog. The abbot suggested they all go inside the abbey and await further developments. Matthias piped up again. We'd best mount a guard on the walls. One of the older mice, Sister Clemence, chided Matthias as an upstart. Her voice was stern and condescending. Novice Matthias, you will be silent and do as your abbot commands. Much to everyone's surprise, the abbot came to Matthias's defense. One moment, Clemence. Matthias speaks sense. Let us hear what he has to say. We are none of us too old to learn. All eyes were turned on the young mouse as Matthias heard himself boldly outline his plans for the defense of Redwall. It was 11 o'clock on that glorious June morning. Mossflower wood in the meadowlands stirred to the brazen voice of the great Joseph Bell. John Church Mouse heaved on the bell rope as he had been told to do by Constance and Matthias. Bong, boom, bong, boom. Even the small creatures in the wood and field who could understand no language save their own, knew what it meant. Time of danger, time of danger, place of sanctuary. Carrying what simple belongings they needed, woodlanders and their families hurried from far and near to gain the safety of the abbey before the storm of Cluny broke upon them. Squirrels, mice, voles, moles, otters, all save the birds of the air, who were safe anyway. Up the long dusty road they came, mothers protectively herding young ones while fathers provided a rear guard. Brother Methuselah stood up at the gate with the abbot. He translated fully to each group of creatures the abbot's message, in turn construing back to the father abbot their grateful thanks with pledges of help and loyalty to Redwall Abbey. For what creature had not been freely given the aid and special knowledge of the kindly mice? All knew that they had owed their very existence to the abbot and his community. Healing, aid, food, shelter, and good advice were granted to all. Now was the time to unite and repay, to give any help that was possible. Before much longer, Redwall would require the skills and knowledge of all its woodland allies. They would be gratefully given. Matthias and Constance stood on top of the high perimeter walls, watching the road. It was noon, and the sun shone directly overhead. Despite the heat, Matthias had ordered all the mice to put on their hoods. It served as a double purpose, to shield their eyes from the sun and to create a camouflage effect. Silently, each one stood, armed with a stout staff. The high red sandstone walls were far too lofty to be scaled by any normal creature. Instinctively, Matthias knew that this was a good defense and a formidable deterrent. Constance could feel her hackles beginning to prickle. She sniffed the air and shivered despite the heat that shimmered in waves across the meadowland. The big badger nudged Matthias. Listen to that. Matthias pricked up his ears and looked at her, questioning. Even the birds have stopped singing, Constance said quietly. The young mouse gripped his staff tighter. Yes, it's the silence we can hear. The grasshoppers have gone quiet. Constance peered down the road as she spoke. Strange for a summer day, little friend. Bong! Every creature standing on the ramparts twitched with fright as the loud voice of the Joseph bell rang out, and John Churchmouse shouted from his position high in the belfry. They're coming! Down the road! I can see them! I can see them! Here comes Cluny's army. Hope they're ready. Well, kids, I'm going to pause there. I hope that you are having a great day and that you are enjoying the story. Love you guys. Bye.